My name is Sarah Romoslawski, and I am the senior UX researcher at Glue Mobile. And I'm here today to talk to you about something called success factors and hypotheses, or how to help teams focus on behaviors and understanding rather than attitudes and feelings for those small sample size playtests that you probably are often running at your studios. So, my goal today is to explain to you, obviously, what hypotheses and success factors are and discuss them in the context of a specific research challenge I believe we all face as user researchers, and show you how they can help you design great studies for playtesting so that, most importantly, you have happy product managers and you make great games. This is the first time that Glue has had some presence here at the summit, so before we dig into the goods, I thought I'd give some background on who we are and what our research service looks like. So, in case you're not aware, Glue Mobile makes mobile games and lots of different kinds of mobile games. Glue makes games from a variety of genres. Most recently, you might have heard of our celebrity titles, including the Kim Kardashian game, as well as we make first-person shooters, time management, and RPG games after the acquisition of Play First a little over a year ago. You know, there's lots of genres, and also some of our games have lots of social and PvP features, while others are more individualized single-player experience. So that results in not only lots of different target audiences, but lots of gameplay experiences, lots of mechanics to keep up on. And so, in other words, Glue really keeps us on our toes as far as games user research is concerned. And all of our games are free to play. So what that means is that our games depend on economies and systems of value that keep players engaged, systems of chance, currencies, customization, appointment-based mechanics, upgrade trees, and if the player wants, these systems allow players to spend money. Something that we have to always be taking into consideration as we assist our teams on the design and development of their games. So, what does our service, our research service, look like? Well, there's actually just two of us right now. My colleague Natalie is sitting right there in the audience. Please talk to her too today. She's very, very great at games user research. She's also really good at Overwatch. So give her a shout out today. So the two of us support 9 studios, and Glue is continuing to grow. So yeah, we're really, really busy. And our service is pretty new, actually. So we've been building this service centrally for the past 2 years. And we offer the whole gamut of research methodologies, from audience insights like large sample surveys. We also do some quantitative player experience studies. We run diary studies. And of course, we do playtests. And here you can see an example of our setup. We've been using OBS, and it's pretty like grassroots the way we do things, and it's been great. It's been a great experience so far building it up. So before we actually dig into what success factors and hypotheses are, I want to address a challenge, a common challenge I think that we all face as games user researchers. So here is your typical game development process, represented by this pretty blue arrow. And along the way, you, the researcher, are doing research, hopefully. Early on, hopefully, teams are engaging you, the expert, in figuring out the game's target audience, perhaps testing concepts or interest in features, or maybe some competing art styles. And as the game gets more fleshed out, you begin to put the game in front of real humans, preferably people you have recruited to the office who fit the game's target audience, and you playtest it. And hopefully you do that more than once. And so, if we were to categorize things, you could say that your research during early development is mostly focused on collecting data revolving around attitudes, and later on in the game development, your process is mostly focused on behaviors. Notice I say mostly. Obviously, it's a little bit of both the whole time. Especially since the problem is that you can't ever really remove attitudes from games. developers are thinking about them every step of the way, because unlike an application, games depend on emotions. Those fiero moments, zen, anticipation, excitement, curiosity, all those things are so important to a good player experience. And furthermore, in free-to-play, value isn't predetermined. So in other words, each player can decide how they feel about your game, influencing their decision to spend or not. The price isn't a sticker on a box on a shelf. The price is variable. So every free-to-play developer wants to know what is happening deep down in a player's heart that is driving them to spend. So it really doesn't matter how much expertise you have on theories of play. Your product manager really just wants to know the answer to one question. Will they buy the gun? How do they feel about that gun? But it's really hard to obtain quality data about attitudes, how people feel deep down in their hearts about that gun, with those small sample sizes that you are recruiting for those usability studies that you are doing later on in development. But when you sit down with your product manager and the dev team and have a good heart-to-heart about what it is they want to know, oftentimes this is what they tell you. I want to know what the players are thinking. I want to know what they're feeling. I want to know how they feel about the guns and how they feel about the tutorial. And so you go on to explain to them that sure, you can ask players on a scale of 1 to 10 how much fun they had playing their game today, but it's a playtest. So sometimes numbers can be elevated, and other times people are just curmudgeons. And you also know deep down in your heart that there are actually some really awesome rubrics out there to measure how players feel while they're playing a game. But those rubrics result in numbers. And for those numbers to be at all valuable, you also need numbers, as in lots of participants, and maybe even a lot of studies to benchmark what those numbers even mean. And heck, you can't do research in a vacuum, right? So, and running these large sample studies is costly. So, the team still told you that really deep down in their hearts that they really mostly care about usability right now anyways, since it's 1 month before beta. And so that should take priority over finding a number to associate whether or not players felt imaginative. So what do? You really do, deep down in your heart, want to be able to tell your dev team if their game is fun or not. And you want to tell them if the players felt imaginative, because you know that it's important for games, and you too care very much about the game, and you want it to make money, also because you like that you have the most ridiculous job in the world, that being watching people play games all day and then making pretty PowerPoint slides about it. And you want to keep your job. So I guess it's also our job as user researchers to take those questions and communicate to our stakeholders how we can refocus them to something observable and measurable, so that we focus the study on those questions entirely. So that your dev team doesn't fixate on the one question that you asked during, say, the interview after your playtest, and that you include in your report that happens to have numbers in it that maybe resulted in the number 7, despite the fact you have a presentation of 50 slides giving evidence of critical playability or usability issues. Because who cares if a game scores a 7 out of 10? If only 8 people played the game in your playtest, and 6 of them couldn't figure out how to upgrade their gun. Maybe all 8 of those people got promotions that day, had an ice cream cone before showing up to your playtest, got engaged to be married, and found out that they won the lottery. And what does 7 even mean? So maybe there's a solution to our touchy-feely questions. And that solution is to design a study that really and truly focuses on behaviors, with the idea that it is really behaviors that, at the end of the day, allow those players to feel those feelings deep down in their hearts. Because if anything is blocking a player from doing those things that your dev team designed to cause those emotions to be felt, say like tiny fonts, or the game's too easy, or the game's too hard, or there's all these missed expectations, or there's too much to learn in the tutorial, well, the team better learn all about those things so that they can fix it. So how do you design a study that focuses really closely on behaviors? What we use at Glue is a combination of a success factor and an accompanying hypothesis. Success factors always relate to behaviors, things a player does, something that a player needs to do to be successful, and they do that because something that they know, because of how the game was designed, that allows them to be successful in the game. And the hypothesis is the dev team's agreement as to whether or not the player, your playtest participant, will be successful or not, and why. So here's the success factor, or the parts of it. So you write it in the first person. A success factor is a little bit user story and a little bit heuristic, and is usually made up of 3 parts: a behavior, an understanding, and a cue. And thanks to Natalie for helping me actually figure out what are some good names for naming these different parts. Here's some examples. So what if you were asked to work on a game like Cooking Dash or Diner Dash? Perhaps there is a success factor like the one we see here. So your cue would be that the NPC explains during the tutorial that the level is timed. Your behavior that you're expecting to see as a result of the cue is that the players are going to start making orders quickly in the time management game, since it's a time management game. And the understanding is that they need to make orders quickly, because if they don't, they're not going to earn enough coins and stars to, like, say, 5-star the level, or even just complete the level in general. So you've got your success factor. Where's the hypothesis? So eventually you'll have a whole list of lots and lots of these things, but here's one. So you can bring the success factor to your team, or your list of them, and hopefully that starts to spark a really nice conversation. So the theme of this conference today is communication. So you can start having a great conversation about the minute details of the UI, their artistic choices, the way the game is currently balanced, etc. And they can start talking to you about what they think is going to happen based on the current state of, like, the build and how the game exists right now. So here's one example. So in a way, success factors are a lens for thinking more deeply about design intent and how those intentions will impact player experiences. And as a lens, they become, for you, a tool of communication between you and your dev team. So we all know that when it comes to developing games, everyone gets very busy in their craft. But by making your list of behaviors and cues and understandings, you can pause together with your team in a room and extract information that may before have been left up to assumption. All right, it's time for some audience interaction. So we know what a success factor is. We said that there's cues and there's behaviors and understanding. So I want everyone here to think about, like, their favorite game, or maybe a game you're working on right now, and think in your mind of some examples of some cues. And you can just shout them out. What are some cues that you think might be in games?
Navigational arrow.
Great, a navigational arrow.
An enemy appearing.
An enemy appearing.
A list of speech options.
Cool, a list of speech options.
Overhearing an NPC conversation.
Yeah, overhearing an NPC conversation. Awesome. So a cue is something that the design team has designed to help the player play. The tutorial, the layout of the store, the conversation from the NPC, icons, achievement notifications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we all pretty much understand what cues are. So games also have target audiences, and audience informs the dev team's design intent too. So even a player's prior knowledge could be a cue, and that might be really important for, you know, who you're recruiting for, and if you understand, like, who the game is for. Maybe it's like an educational game. They're coming in with some very specific knowledge. But we know that cues can't stand alone. Cues need to trigger behaviors and knowledge, because without those things, we can't make choices. So in the design of your study, every cue has to be tied to a behavior, and every behavior to an understanding, so that we can test what was intended by the designers against the choices and actions players actually take. So what about some examples of behaviors that maybe a cue would trigger? Take some time.
Tapping on the thing the arrow is pointing.
Yeah, tapping on the thing.
Pulling the right trigger on the controller to shoot.
Yeah, shooting the gun. Just one more. Buying more currency, great. So behaviors are what cues just make us do, right, in the game. Upgrading my weapon, customizing my characters, going to get more currency, purchasing the consumable, winning with ease. Yes.
How ingrained do you get with behaviors? Some of these are like customizing your character. These are very, very complex behaviors.
Yes.
Do you also break it down into specific, subparts of that task, and there's cues and behaviors within that?
Yes, you could.
Okay.
Yeah. So it depends on what. So yes, I'll talk a little bit about like how you're going to organize and plan your study. So it should all funnel into the research question. So if the research question is really specific about, say, like a flow, like the user flow of the player customizing their dress. So then, and they're really trying to test a very specific UI element, then you're probably going to get pretty granular. Yeah. So behaviors are what cues make us do, and then finally there's understanding. So what are a couple examples of, say, the games you're working on, of what you think an understanding would be that a player would need to develop from the cues and from the cues?
How to make money in the game.
Yeah, how to make money. Great. What? Where to go? Right, where to go? How to walk around the world. And that there's other places that exist and that you're starting to keep in your memory. So, awesome, thank you. So, along with the behavior comes my understanding of why I need to do that behavior. In other words, my interpretation of the cue, its value, its important, and how as a player it speaks to me. So, things like I should try to get 5 stars. Like that's how I as a completionist can complete the game. Or if I get 3 headshots in a row, that gives me a combo, and that gives me maybe like a higher payout. Or that particular NPC is the antagonist. Or that particular currency is very rare, so I should probably hoard it so I can save up for that cool thing later. And in a lot of ways, understandings are also very often motivators, something that is driving the player to keep playing the game. So, now that we know what success factors are, how do you put them into practice? By designing your study. So let's take a look at that in the context of designing a playtest. So here's your typical research process. We all probably go through something similar. We saw something in the talk in this room. The first talk in this room, they had a circle. It's very similar. You start with the need, and eventually you present your results. But we're going to zoom in specifically to the design of your study. So in order to design a study, you need questions. In order to get questions, you usually do 2 things. You usually interview the team. Maybe you have a key set of questions you would like to ask them about like where they're at in their milestone and like what their vision is and things that they wish they could ask players. And of course, you play the game itself. And from interviewing the team and from playing the game, you start to create a list. The list of things that you hear from your team, things that they want to know, what they want to know from the study, and you'll start to hear sort of similar things. Like, I want to know what the players think about the tutorial. I want to know if they feel challenged. I want to know if they like the mystery boxes. And so you start to keep those things in the back of your mind, right? And then you play the game. You play the game a lot. And as you play the game, you start to make your list of success factors. So you've interviewed the team, and you've played the game, and you've made your list, and then you really begin to understand the design of the game through playing it and studying it and writing your list. And then you can begin to adjust your research questions to be more measurable and more behavior focused. For example, a lot of times teams come to me and they're really already thinking about monetization. They're thinking about, like, is the player going to use that item? But we want to understand more about, like, how does the player use that item, and what way do they use the item? Do they understand the item in general? So we want to take those, like, feely questions and turn them into more of a behavior question. And thus, you now have a great set of questions that can be answered by what you learned from testing your success factors. So here's an example. So let's take, for example, the question that a typical question you're probably going to need to answer every time you work with a team and you want to test their first iteration on, say, their onboarding design. So you want to know, does the tutorial teach players the core skills necessary for completing the level? And then you have cues, behaviors, and understandings for supporting and answering that question. So things like, and here we're looking at in the context of, say, a time management game again, something like Cooking Dash or Diner Dash. Things like, I deliver items quickly because if I don't, I can't beat the level. I tap to collect the coin tips because in order to seat more customers, I need to collect my earnings. Or, like, I don't let food burn because I would have to remake it and thus lose time. And once you've made your list, you can go back to the team and have another discussion with them about each success factor that you created and decide if your participants will be successful or not. So that's where they're telling you their hypothesis, is that their acceptance or rejection of your success factor and why. So teams might bring something like outside knowledge to the table about their current concerns for the design. Maybe they've tested amongst themselves. Maybe they've tested with friends or family members. Maybe some certain text they've been iterating on some text or some designs, they're not really sure. Or it may just be a simple yes. Yes, we agree, we think that the player is going to be successful. So at this point, you've got your success factors and you've discussed them with your dev team, and they've provided additional information with their hypotheses. And they agreed that your list covers all that needs to be covered for the playtest. So how do success factors and hypotheses help you focus your observations so that you can actually extract data from running your study? So when we run our playtest, we watch, we listen to what the player has to say, and we also have to know who succeeded, and we have to keep track of all the behaviors that we listed in our success factors. It's a lot to handle, right? But luckily, you've already made a list. You've already done the work. You've taken that deep dive, and you've worked through your success factors, and you've reviewed them with your team. So now you just have a full list of all the behaviors and knowledge that a player needs to know. So you can populate, say, like a Google Doc or maybe a worksheet that you print out, and you can hand that out to your dev team, similar to, say, running a task analysis. Your dev team members now have a tool to actively view and observe your playtest sessions. They don't have an excuse not to watch your playtest, because they've got something that can really help them and keep them engaged. So they can actually bring back some valuable information for you. Because as a team of two, we need all the help. We need all the help we can get. So finally, when you're ready to write your report, you can go through each success factor and its combination of cue, behavior, and understanding. And with the help of your dev team's observations, you can basically score each success factor and basically provide something sort of like a usability dashboard for each success factor. This will then be the bulk of your report, where you can draw conclusions on why players are failing and if that failure stems from cues, behaviors, understandings, or perhaps a combination of them. So here we see the cue, behavior, and understanding on the top, and then the dev team's hypothesis. Then we can see how many, say that we had 7 playtesters that day, and then we can have some findings, some examples, some conclusions on, say, like maybe it was a weak cue. So now that we know how success factors support the design and execution of your playtest, how are you going to keep your product managers happy? Well, you need to do that by forming conclusions that are actionable. Product managers need something to work with. And success factors help you write great conclusions that include evidence and reasoning for player failure or misunderstanding. So, you can zoom in on what the problem is. Perhaps players completely understand the cue, but they don't understand how to use the controls, and thus a certain behavior is never demonstrated. Maybe you know from interviewing the player after a study that they have a misunderstanding of a core system. Perhaps the players were on the right track, but maybe something got in the way of a behavior. And then you can say that because of that, players weren't really able to drive home their understanding. So here are some more specific examples. A few combinations of cues, behaviors, and understandings that didn't work out. You can provide both a high-level conclusion along with a detailed conclusion. So your team can get the big picture. For example, on a high level, the team knows that weak cues are causing misbehaviors. But more specifically, you can point out that there's too much text to read, and thus players skip over dialogue boxes, thus they don't learn a critical skill. So if we look at this one specific example, so we see something like there's a strong cue, a strong understanding, but inability to demonstrate behavior. And the specific conclusion is that players know they need to shoot the target, but the controls are too sensitive. And then for each success factor and its accompanying conclusions, that's where you can decide how to organize your supporting evidence, things like images, quotes, video clips. Maybe here's a great place too to talk about like suggestions or considerations for the team for including, for maybe thinking about other designs or other approaches. But everyone has a big but. And I don't know if anyone here is old enough to understand the reference to this, but it's one of my favorite things in the world. So everyone has a big but. And our big but as user researchers and as game developers is emotions. And emotions can and still play a role in your analysis. I've been talking a lot about behaviors today and that you need to sort of get away from attitudes, but at the end you can't get away from them. And here's one of all of our favorite infographics from Zio Design, Nicole Lazaro. And we know that fun, the 4 keys to fun is emotions. So you can't just like forget about emotions, right? Well, you're the expert on play, you're the expert on psychology, you're the expert on strategy, you're the expert on emotions. So you know that a player can't feel something if they don't do something. So you include that in your conclusion slides, areas where you think emotions may be blocked because of the cues and behaviors you do or don't observe. So say for instance, if we know that Fiero is an incredibly important to a good player experience and there are clear indicators that players aren't experiencing it, then hopefully your product manager and dev team can prioritize some time to think about their design so that they guide and teach and scaffold the player. And what about some patterns? So we know how to keep our product managers happy, but how do we, at the end of the day, use success factors and hypotheses to support the design of great games? As you work on your games, you'll begin to see patterns and build your own set of success factors that can be shared across teams, across games, and you can begin to build a strong set of behaviors and understandings that you think should be triggered by the core set of cues that are standard across all of your games. One of the questions I've been thinking a lot about lately in free-to-play is the question of value and what cues trigger what behaviors that prove that something is valuable to a player. So why should you use success factors and hypotheses? I really like them because they're malleable. Together, the parts are great tools for designing a strong study, but even individually, they can be used in other forms of research and evaluation. At Glue, we're always considering our process, our methods, and refining the way we communicate interesting findings so that we are helpful to our teams. Building a list of strong cues or behavioral player types or the types of player understandings that are the most motivating could impact teams on the front end of their design process. And the best part is that the process affords for opening up that communication channel and collaboration between the researcher and the dev team. You can show in writing that you have made the effort to become the expert on their game, and you have a clear plan on how you are going to test the questions that they need answered and form conclusions that allow teams to know where the problems stem from. And your team will be better equipped to communicate their design intent to you, to leave nothing to be assumed. So, give them a try. Thanks a lot. And I think it's lunchtime, and I'm not sure everyone else has been cutting questions short, but if you want to ask any questions, I'm happy to answer your questions. Or if you're starving, you can, I think, go eat lunch. Yes?
So if your teams have these questions that are about attitude,
Yes.
do they just, I see you're steering them towards this framework, but is there like, without, it seems like the only way to answer those questions is to do classical playtests with enough people that you have
Yeah.
a way, confidence in the results. Do you do any of that?
So there's a few different things to take into consideration when teams have requirements for gathering attitudes. So in some cases, it may be that it's early enough and there's like artifacts from the game where you could say run a study that's different than a play test, where you can focus on attitudes and you can get a large sample and you can do it in a way that isn't costly, say like a survey. Obviously there's other ways to do that too. Like there's some great rubrics out there like the GEQ, and perhaps like you're really trying to understand a comparison. Perhaps your team is like really trying to understand, if they're really trying to understand fun factor like in a specific mode, then you might want to do more of a comparison study where you're actually trying to compare modes, and then you can actually look at those rubrics where you can assess things like immersion and challenge and affect. But when a team is really trying to get first at those understanding usability issues, and it's like they really need to get at those first before they can actually understand player experience. Because the argument that like we try to make to our teams is that if you don't have those first things first, if a player can't do something because there's something in the design that's preventing them to do that, then they're never going to feel those feelings. So we try to steer our teams to think about those questions at the appropriate times. But of course, the question should always come before the method. So if it's very critical for a team to know something, that's going to inform our approach. Yes?
Given that a lot of, especially free-to-play games, have energy mechanics, how do you get around that when you're testing? If you're wanting to test, how often or how well they understand the store, if the store doesn't open up later, or mechanics like that?
Sure. So when we're thinking about all those different systems that are in free-to-play games, what we want to do is we want to sit down with the team and talk about what those assumptions are. So we make those lists in our success factors. So it might be that if a player, so for things like energy, it might just be energy divides up the sessions for a certain amount of time. Like they might play for a certain amount of time, and they have, we think that a first session might last, say, like 15 minutes. And then you're trying to really understand what were they able to do in that first session. Was it enough? Are they frustrated when did they hit that energy wall too soon? And then for things like the store, then what we usually talk about with the teams is are there enough cues in the game that are the cues in the game funneling the people to the store? And when they get to the store, what do the players do when they're in the store? Is the store interesting to them? Do they like browse the items, or do they get to the store and there may be cases where, and there's cases that we've experienced in testing our games, where they get to the store and they actually don't even know what's for sale. So it's still making sure that those usability issues are covered first. And then we can dig into those maybe more experiential or attitudinal questions.
Right, but so do you just bring them in for that initial session, but how do you test the stuff that's later in the game, if there is an energy?
So if there's an energy system and the energy system has to be tested, then we make sure we keep them long enough, and maybe we divide so maybe we keep them for 2 hours, then we take a break, and then we ask questions, and then we say they're going to be playing over a period of time of like say 90 minutes, but that's actually like 5 sessions or 3 sessions, and so we make sure we divide it up and they get through the content. So we have to talk with the team and understand how much content they need the player to get through and what content they need to hit. And then if it's much more longitudinal, if the game is much more developed, that's when we might recommend to the team to do a diary study. And then we assess, say, maybe a playtest isn't the right method at this point. Maybe we've already done a lot of playtests, and we need them to hit that elder game content. At that point, it's probably time to give them a promo code and run a diary study so that people play it, say, like over 14 days. And then we're assessing that in surveys and daily check-ins.
What do you have them do during the breaks if you have them just
We usually do an interview. So we usually have a post-play interview, and we do some in-play interview, or maybe they might go to the bathroom or get a drink of water. Yeah, just something to divide up the session so it feels like an actual session. Say like 15 minutes they're playing on a bus or while waiting in line. That's a good question. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned earlier participants determining attitudes
Uh-huh.
for participants. Like you're using larger sample sizes there. So what's your structure about going about that one? Like, are we talking about the tests that are done across a large group of people? You're sending out codes. You're having them play just to figure out what their attitudes are with the game and how they would rate certain things. Like, are you sending surveys that are sent to them externally? I'm just a little curious about that process.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question is, how do we actually gather attitudinal data, right? So it just depends on what the question is from the team. So the question from the team might be, hey, we have, it might be really early in development, and the team might be coming to us and saying, we have 4 art styles. We're not really sure which one's going to work. In that case, we're probably going to run a survey. Or it might be a different situation where there's a prototype and they're trying to understand a mode and maybe how the mode measures up to a similar mode in like a competitor's game. In that case, we might use a rubric that already exists or design a custom rubric to assess, say, like experience in a multiplayer mode in a mobile shooter or something like that. In that case, what we've done in the past is we've brought people in. They've played the games. It's not a huge sample size. It might be like 30 or 40. They'll play both modes, and they'll still be filling out a survey, but they'll be doing it like on their on an iPad or on the device they used.
How long does that typically run for? Like, so if you're bringing 30 people in, say you're thinking for a while, do you guys run these sessions for a month?
We try to be pretty quick and dirty. So when we do playtests, we usually do them over a course of a few days. I mean, most of when we're doing a playtest is usually one-on-one think aloud. When we're doing like a larger sample, we'll bring lots of people, and since they're just playing on a mobile device, they can all play together in a room. And it's usually still over a course of a couple days, just because of the logistics, and we don't have like a giant room or a giant lab. Similar to like what EA has here for where they're like testing console games and things like that. We have to like book our conference room and kick everyone else out. Sure. Hopefully that answers your question. I think that there's food out there and you guys are probably hungry, and I'm happy to talk to you further, but thanks a lot.